I have hit one of those milestones where I've reached 100 subscribers. Anyways, uh, I have been reading, but lately it's been more like technical stuff because I have a getting into computer science, which is gonna be its own YouTube channel. What I'm gonna do for this, since it's just been a bunch of stuff, and none of them have been particularly fun or really memorable, this little disorganized wrap up is going to be me essentially listing off what I've read and making extemporaneous comments about it, them, whatever. So I read this book called The Lady with the Borzoi. Borzoi, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's about Blanche Knopf, I think that's how you pronounce that, who's Alfred A. Knopf's wife, you know, from the publisher, Knopf. They started publishing in like the 20s, or the 10s, the other ones. It's a biography of her life. And this is when it kind of hit me that, you know, it's not the most interesting just on the merits, but it is a biography, so it has its own, you know, shared universe. Another funny thing that kind of crept into me as I read, there was this book that came out that they published called Heaven by some guy, I forget. And now that phrase comes from like the nosebleed seats of like operas and concerts, which is where black people would be sold tickets. They wouldn't be sold in like the front of a house or anything. They'd be up on the nosebleeds. So this guy is a white guy. He wrote this book, which was about an interracial relationship, and it was divisive back then. And I'm not exactly sure why. Like, we often like to give the idea that if we dislike something, there's a good and objective reason for it, or that like now after so many years of social advancement, we have a more refined view or a course-corrected view of how these things should be received or how things should play out in the world. But the reception of this book was, I think it would have had the same reception as if it came out today or yesterday or whatever. People in the black community loved and hated it, you know. What's his face? W.E.B. Du Bois said it was terrible and set black people back so-and-so through his depiction, and Langston Hughes thought it was awesome and it did a good job representing whatever. But it's known, I mean, it's not known. Like I never heard of the book before. I don't know if you heard of the book, but I never heard of the book. And it was known primarily then for being like a roadmap to the Harlem area and what Harlem was like during the Renaissance. That's kind of what it was used for back then, and kind of died with the time. She also was the first person to publish Camus in English, or in America maybe, whatever, with The Stranger. And that was an instant classic, and it's like still, you will see people chatting up about that book. And there weren't that many like types of books. Like that's what the Nope brand tried to lean on in terms of the books that they were making and publishing. But most books were these kinds of, you know, works that pop up for a time and would sell great in their era, but as soon as their moment passed, they were forgotten and no longer printed. I've never heard of these books, you know. And authors who, after they were finished, their work kind of died in their time, or, you know, after they became movies and became iconic movies, that was it for them. These kinds of works have been happening for a long time and have popped up and faded away in like a natural way, you know? I mean, the same thing has happened with music. And it's easy to forget that there's been pop trash for as long as there's been recorded music. And there's been recorded music for, I mean, in the Western notation style, there's been, you know, recorded music for like 1,200 years. Not all of these recorded works of music has been turned into audio recordings, you know? That's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of like the availability of these classics and stuff like that. I'm sure you get what I'm getting at. I'm spending a lot of time on this book. I didn't like it that much. Like, it was fine, but I didn't like it that much. Just wasn't that into it, you know? It's mostly like her life and stuff. And she was a cool chick, you know? The end. Pretty cool chick. Okay, so I read this book called Living in the Flow by Nelson. The book was trying to explain, what was that thing called? Synchronicity. Trying to objectively, like, prove synchronicity. I mean, the way that I read it was like, this guy was trying to use, like, physics to show that a meaningful coincidence has the regularity of like a mathematical function. Although it may not have significance to you, it does not invalidate its existence as a function, you know? In the same way that just because you cannot directly experience a 13-dimensional object doesn't mean that there are not 13-dimensional objects, you know what I mean? If you don't, that's fine. And I also felt like it missed the mark, kind of, simply because I don't know, I wasn't able to understand it. Like, look, if anyone knows about freaking magical thinking and synchronicity and stuff, hey, what's going on? This book actually made me think, well, maybe this stuff doesn't exist. Like, maybe it's just like, because I'm reading all these examples of synchronicities and just thinking, so? Screw it, you know? Screw it. I was thinking so much about like how much we can actually know, you know? Like, what can we actually know? And what does that even mean, to know something? What does that even mean? I thought I was gonna understand it. I thought I was gonna see where I at least would lose my understanding, but I didn't. I guess it's like my fault. I mean, whatever. I read the book. That's what I'm here to tell you. I'm here to tell you that I read a book called Living in the Flow. Okay. So I read this other book called The Art of Mindful Reading. It wasn't the book I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like what reading can do for you or what reading does to people, but it was more of like, it reminded me of like a Cosmo magazine thing, you know, where you know, Cosmo is like, you know, 12 ways to wow your man in bed. This book was like, you know, 13 ways to fall in love with books again. That's really what it should have been titled. It should have been 4 blog posts instead of 1 book, because the whole thing was like, read a book in a tree, go under the covers and read a book in the dark like you did when you were a kid. Like, it was really like a romance, like romancing the book is what it was. I don't recommend it. Laptop Millionaire, that's an interesting book. A little bit outdated, but I can't say that any of the tactics in there wouldn't work. They're a little fishy. I mean, like just today I heard about these cats in Bali who got in trouble because they were, you know, taking advantage of the gig economy to earn American bucks over in Bali. Apparently that's illegal or something, I don't know. This book is all about that, about making money online in the American or Western, whatever high dollar economy you can get at, and then live in some place that's mad cheap but still really nice. Every tactic is buttressed by 3 or a couple of stories of people who've made more than $10,000 using that tactic alone, without any slowing down on the hype train for each tactic, which, you know, a little bit sketchy if you're asking me, and the way it was written was kind of salesy, and the author learned it from a guy named the Laptop Millionaire. You know, red flags, kids, red flags, but I can't say that any of these things don't work. So you read the tapping solution, it's just another tapping book, you know, and you kind of only need to know the technique, because it's like anything else, like you'll kind of show yourself as you practice the techniques, you'll learn to calibrate yourself. There are a million tapping scripts, but none of them house the magic words, and if there are magic words, you'll know what they are because you'll be asking yourself. You'll be feeling it like, oh, I want to say this as I tap this away because it feels like this. So if it feels like that, that's what you gotta say. So that's kind of what popped to my head when I read that book. But I read it and go, okay, I read this book called Concept-Rich Mathematics, which is like a mathematics book for like teachers. And I was hoping it would be more into like mathematical concepts, but it was all about like how to learn mathematics, which is very useful to me, like all the ways of breaking down a concept so that you can integrate it. Because as I was growing up learning math, it was like in algebra I would just like look at each algebraic equation or function as like its own separate machine, then take the objects or whatever from the question that I need to feed through the machine to give me the answer that I'm looking for. And that's kind of how I've viewed maths ever since. It also kind of took me a step away from mathematics, and as I continue to learn, like especially computer science, like getting into mathematics is a little bit integral if I plan to have any true utility in the world of computer science. It was an interesting read, but not a necessary read. That's what strings all this whole list together. Each one of these books was interesting, but not necessary. So the last book is called Learn Python 3 the Hard Way. It was very hands-on. I mean, I didn't know nothing about nothing. It's pretty much the way that I would do that book is I download it, throw up my text editor. I'd put it on the computer, one side text editor, the other side the book, and just copy the text, copy the lines of code and run it, debug it, whatever, and then read on and be like, okay, what did I just do? Which for the first like working code that I write, I found really helpful, because I didn't have to understand anything. A lot of the other books that I'm reading, they give you the concept up front, and I really have just no concept of the actions involved, so it was just too abstracted for me to understand until I read through that book, which, looking back, is a painfully slow read, doing strands of code, learning small concept by small concept, but necessary for me in order to understand larger bits of information that come with the other books that I've been reading. As I continue to learn new things with computer code, I do find it important to read more than one source so that I can decontextualize the work, which is something that I learned from freaking Concept-Rich Mathematics. So hey, there was some value there. So I'm reading freaking Oblivion with Noah. Everyone who reads it must converse. We talked about Mr. Squishy. You might have seen me from that and then subscribed, so shouts out to you. And so we're gonna go through all that stuff, and Oblivion's kind of kicking my butt because it's just making me think like, what am I living for? Which is terrible. It's so much better to just distract yourself with doing things than to burden yourself with the contemplation of like, why do things? I'm doing a longer read of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Me and the homie Lino over at Dostoevsky Fan 11, we've decided to do this thing for 3 months and just follow the method of the book for 3 months to see if we achieve our goals or if we just go back to being, losers. You can catch me once a week over at his spot, posted up, somewhere in the dark, chatting. Thanks, BookTube. Yeah.